4, 3, 2, 1. All right, Proverbs chapter 19. We're going to pick up where we left off last week. Proverbs 19, verse 12. I believe where we're at. Proverbs 19 and verse 12. And I knew there's a lot of notes, but Proverbs 19 and verse 12 is where we're going to pick up. Proverbs 19 and verse 12, and it says this: the king's wrath is as a roaring lion, but his favor is as dew upon the grass. And of course, this just goes back to the concept of the guy in charge is the guy you want to be in good graces with. But it even has a greater purpose than that, and that what? Who is our king? It's the Lord Jesus Christ. And it's hard to take this, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, and understand this. Again, the lion part, the lamb is the Savior, but the lion is the king. The lamb may be salvation, but the lion is judgment. And he has died. He's the lamb. You have a chance to trust him as the lamb, and if you reject him as the lamb, then you better get ready for the lion. It's like the old expression, March goes in like a lamb and out like a lion, or in like a lion, out like a lamb. You know how they do it? And because it's either calm or windy, or it's windy or calm, or however it works. And it's the same thing. The Lord is a lamb. He comes to you as a lamb. Here I am. I want to redeem you. I want to reconcile you with God. I want you to be born again spiritually. I want to forgive your sins. I want to do that. But if you reject him as the lamb, then you're going to have to deal with the lion. And what the principle here is, the king's wrath is as a roaring lion. Let me tell you something. Lions look cute and cuddly on TV. They look cute and cuddly when you get a little stuffed one. You know what I'm saying? Or you watch a little Disney cartoon or something. Lions look cute and cuddly and everything. But let me tell you something. You wouldn't want to meet one in the wild. I read a book one time called Cowboy Boots in Darkest Africa. Remember reading that book? Cowboy Boots in Darkest Africa. And basically it was this evangelist who took a tour of the African continent. He was preaching the gospel over there. Man, there are some funny stories in that thing. And only because we'd been to Haiti and different countries, and we could relate to the culture shock and some of the things that you see. And although he treated everybody with great respect, and he didn't make fun of anyone, he made fun of himself, reacting to the things he saw. But he had encounters with lions. And so they were running from something at night, and they were out in the bush, and it was dark, and they saw this big pile of rocks, like a big mound of rocks. And so they thought, let's climb up on them rocks, That way we can see things coming from a long way off, because they're up on these rocks. And they got up on these rocks, and they're standing there. And sure enough, they could see for a long way. Of course, when it gets dark, but when they get up there, they're like, this is great. But some guy noticed there was a pile of bones up on the rocks, and they're like, what is this? Well, it turns out that's where a pride of lions actually slept, if you will. And so toward the evening time, guess what started coming out of the bush to the rocks? They're for the same purpose. So here come these lions, And so now they're up on top of these rocks with lions surrounding these rocks, so they start a fire because animals are still afraid of fire over, at least at this time. You get this is probably back in the 40s, 50s and something like that. Yeah, I would think so. But so they start this fire, in order to keep, and of course they would use it to frighten off the lions, but nobody could sleep. Everybody had to stay awake because they had to keep that fire going all night long. And then it started raining. Then it started raining. Oh yeah. So they had to hover over the fire in order to keep the rain from putting out the fire. He says it burned off his eyebrows. It burned, because they had to protect that fire at all costs because those lions were down there, And so, like I said, we look at them cute and cuddly and everything on TV and stuff like that, and then there's always Clarence the Cross-Eyed Lion. Remember him from back in that one television show they had with the Cross-Eyed Lion? Anybody remember Clarence the Cross-Eyed Lion? You remember him? Okay. And and everybody thinks, no. They are meat-eating machines, man. And it don't matter if you walk on 2 legs or 4. If you're meat, you're meat. And you just and I'm saying they're wow, a roaring lion. If you're hearing a roaring lion, Okay, according to the books I've read, if you're hearing a roaring lion, because I've never heard one, not in the wild, that means it's spotted you. And it roars because that causes panic and you freeze. The roar is meant to get you to freeze before it pounces. And so the wrath of a king is as a roaring lion. In other words, boom, he's about to pounce. Okay, he's about to use that scepter authority that he has to punish, to exercise his will. There's a funny story in there about a panther too that I thought was the best, and I love the panther story even above the lion story, because he was talking about the types of weapons he chose to take with him over there. And he had 44 Magnum, and he thought that'll be good enough, 44 Magnum. Everybody tried to tell him to take elephant guns, big elephant guns, because I'm a 44. Man, it's a 44 Magnum, and so he and this other missionary, they were in a little truck full of, it had some pastors, some national pastors in the back, and they were headed from point A to point B down a road that was nothing more than wagon ruts, to get from one village to the next. And it was dark, and as they're driving down through there, this panther jumps out into the middle of the road and starts, running. And they stop the thing, and it stops and turns and looks at him, and it starts wowing and challenging them. And so he's, I'll take care of this. He looked in the back, and the nationals were diving under the seats. So he reached out the window with his 44 and went kablooey and shot it. And did it die? No. A 44 is like a BB gun on those animals. It don't mean they're big and they're tough. All it did was tick that animal off. He said that animal turned in that path, looked right back at him, and screamed at him. He says then the whole van started shaking because those national pastors in the back end were trying to find an exit, because that thing started crouching and coming down the road at him. He didn't. So he fired again. Still didn't stop. Eventually, he scared it off into the bush. And he goes, I think I killed it. I think I'll go out there and I'll get it. And the missionary said, don't go. He goes, why not? He goes, you haven't killed it. He goes, well, but it run off into the bush. He goes, it's waiting for you in the bush. It's a trick. And these animals play these tricks on us all the time. He said, because that little cap gun you've got right there, isn't going to do the job. He tells another story of it was a caribou or some big kind of deer kind of like animal, and where this guy shot it with something like that, some little pea shooter of a gun, and ticked that thing off, and that thing chased him up a tree and tore his backside up because it reached up there and started biting him. I mean, these animals are nothing to be played with. I mean, here in America we can shoot something and everything will run, because it's scared, but over there, that fear just isn't there. But the wrath of a king is as a roaring lion. But his favor is as a dew upon the grass. And of course we understand what that means, dew upon the grass. That's blessings, that helps, that's a blessing. So to earn the favor of a king is good. To earn the wrath of a king is not so good, okay? And we have to understand that. But also when it comes to our Lord Jesus Christ, we have to understand that too. We want to stay in his favor and not incur his wrath. Then moving on to verse number 13, a foolish son is the calamity of his father, and the contentions of a wife are a continual dropping. And so here again we have a foolish son who's calamity. And it's multiplied or manifold sorrows. Okay? Multiplied or manifold sorrows is what a calamity is. In other words, it's not just one thing that goes wrong. It's multiple problems that it creates. And so, unfortunately, when a father has to deal with a son that is foolish, and in the proverbial context, we're talking about someone who has turned his back on God and refused to accept Christ as his Savior, refused to worship as the way he was created to do. He's a foolish son. And he may be smart in a lot of other things. Maybe very clever, okay, in a lot of things. Maybe he makes a lot of money. Maybe he's very famous, Maybe he's very influential. Maybe he's very popular. But it doesn't make a difference. He's turned his back on God. He's foolish. I read this thing yesterday. I shared it with Susan. It's pretty neat. And now, again, it's a neat story. I would have to do a lot of research to find out if it was totally authentic. But it was a great story, and I'm going to share it with you. And because it deals with with foolishness and foolish people. This professor got up in his class and he asked the question, did God create evil? And he asked the question, did God create everything? And then one of the students raised their hand and said, well, yes, God created everything. He says, everything. He says, yes, he created everything. Did God create evil? And the student sheepishly backed down. He goes, well, let's just say if God created everything, then he created evil. And if God created evil, and we are the sum of what we are and what we do, then God must be evil. And the professor thought himself to be very clever. But it's the coming up. So another student raised their hand and said, Professor, can I ask you a question? He goes, certainly, go ahead. He goes, does cold exist? Cold, C-O-L-D. Does cold exist? And the professor says, well, of course it does. He goes, no, sir, it doesn't. There's no such thing as cold. Cold is simply the absence of heat. Cold is a word we've used to describe the absence of heat. That is true. That is from a physics standpoint, that is 100% true. Cold does not exist. No, that's right. That's right. You can't measure cold. You measure heat. The heat is energy. And energy can be measured. And the reason matter is excited and moves based upon the amount of energy that it has. The reason why things freeze is because the energy's gone and matter can no longer be activated. Okay? So there really is no such thing as cold. It's just an absence of heat. It's just what we call it. Then he said, sir, another question, sir. The professor really, obviously he can't argue with the sir, is there such a thing as darkness? And the professor said, well, yes. He goes, wrong, sir. Darkness does not exist. Once again, it's a word to describe the absence of light. Because you cannot measure darkness. You can measure light, but you cannot measure darkness. So then neither cold nor darkness actually exist. Cold is the absence of heat, and darkness is the absence of light. To which the professor, again, could not argue, because this is, from a physics standpoint, that is true. And so he went back and he said, an evil is just a word we use to describe the absence of God. Because without the love of God and the wisdom of God and the power of God, you have evil. And I thought that was a brilliant illustration. Now, the person it credits is what I'd have to actually research to make sure. Because it said the student who asked these questions was Albert Einstein. He's not the professor, he was the student that brought it up, that posed. That's just what, I don't know if Albert Einstein actually, you're going to look at I never bothered, I just thought it would. But even if Albert Einstein didn't actually have this conversation, even if someone just made this whole entire story up, it's still brilliant. Because evil, as they're using the term evil, is truly just the absence of God. So to say God created evil, God didn't create evil. Evil is just what exists when God's not there. Evil is what exists when God's not allowed to influence it, when God's not allowed to input his love, when God's not allowed to input his wisdom, when God's not allowed to input his caring grace. You have evil. And so foolishness, it's the reason why it's so foolish to push God out of your world and to push God out of your life is because all that will remain is evil. Because God is love, and God is good, and God is light, and God is wisdom. And so if you move God out of your world, what do you have left? But what we would typically call evil. Anyway, I thought it was clever, so I thought I'd share it with you. I take no credit for it. I don't. And again, I don't even know that Albert Einstein was necessarily the guy that originally said it. But it is a very clever, because it is. It's like people all the time want us to prove God exists. My challenge to them is, you prove to me he doesn't exist. Because until you can prove to me he doesn't exist, I'm going to go on living like he does. See, they always challenge us. They say God doesn't exist, and then they throw it back on us to prove he does. And I'm going to go on living like he doesn't until you prove he does. Well, that's stupid. Because if he does exist, then you're going to be judged by him. So it's much wiser, much more intelligent to accept the fact that he does, and he's going to judge you and live like that until someone can prove beyond any doubt that he doesn't exist, than it would be to live as if he doesn't exist till someone proves that he does. It's the height of arrogance. It's not wise, and it certainly isn't rational, and it certainly isn't reasonable to live your life as if God doesn't exist. But a foolish son, that's why a foolish son is a calamity to his father. Why? Because there's multiple layers. There's so many problems. And then the contentions of a wife are continual dropping. Now notice he says it's the contentions of a wife, not the wife herself. The foolish son is a calamity. But the contentions of a wife, the constant fighting of a wife constantly fighting her husband all the time on everything, and fighting and being contentious. That's what contentious means. It means to fight. It's like a continual dropping. It's like that leaky faucet. Drip, 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 drip. And how that just absolutely can get on your very last nerves. Drip, 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 drip. And it does. Gets on your last nerves. Noises can do that to me. I remember one time I came home from ministry back when I was in seminary, and I went to the dormitories, and I was dead tired. I'd worked all night before. I'd done a whole day's worth of ministry, and I just needed to go home and get some sleep, And so I got in the dorm. I got in my bunk. I thought, oh, here we go. Great. I'll get some sleep. I'll get 5-6 hours sleep, and then I'll be able to get up and do it all over again. The guy in the bunk in the room next to me decided he wanted to practice his boxing, and sat in there, boom, 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 punching on a bag, boom, 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 boom. I'm laying in bed, boom, boom. I mean, it wasn't really vibrating the room, but that constant, steady, boom, 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 boom. I flew out of that bed. I came out my door. I went down the hall. I went into the next room, and he's standing there. He's about to punch as I come through the door. Anyway, it wasn't a Christian encounter. But to say this, he stopped throwing punches. And because that continual dropping is so irritating. I remember there was another time this group of students was out. Susan and I were working. We were trying to get some stuff done. And they were out there playing this stupid cup game. Do you remember the cup game? They're out there playing, I don't know, where they go, doop, 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 and they move these cups in a rhythmic pattern, stacking them and unstacking them or something. I really never got the gist of it, And, but there's like 3 or 4 of them around this table, and they're all doing this, and I'm in there, and I've really got to get this stuff done, And Susan and I are working, and there's this constant clacking and clamoring and banging of cups out there. I mean, the more I work and the more they go, the more irritated I'm becoming, until I pushed myself back from my desk, and I ran out there, and the biggest guy at the table, I went up to him, I grabbed that cup. I said, if you do that one more time, I'm going to shove this thing up your nose and pull it out your throat. It was so quiet after that. And it wasn't right. I'm laughing now, but it was so irritating. That's what it means. So a wife, when she's constantly fighting and battling her husband over everything, she's being contentious. It's like a continual dropping. And so the admonition here, of course, is what? To encourage your son not to be foolish. The admonition here is basically that a wife can create more trouble by being contentious than she can solve by trying to challenge her husband. Sometimes it's just better to let him fall down and bloody his nose than pick him up and put a Band-Aid on his nose and let him learn than to constantly argue with him. I remember one time, right when I first took over, we had a wonderful lady in our kitchen. Loved her to death. Oh man, what a great lady she was. And she were in our kitchen, but I'd just taken over the running of the school, and so she was uncertain of my leadership style or whatever it was. And she pulled my wife aside, because my wife and her were good friends, and she pulled my wife aside, and she goes, "What's your husband like? Does he listen to suggestions? Does he, blah, blah, blah?" And I says, "Well, if he gets it in his head that this is what he wants to do, then that's what he's going to do. Just let him do it, and if he falls down and bloodies his nose, he'll get up, wipe his nose off, and won't do it again. It's like, but just let him do it. He'll listen, but if he gets in his head, this is what he wants to do, then that's what he's going to do. And the best thing is just let him fall and bloody his nose, and then you'll be fine. And that's how you deal with it. So make your suggestions. If he doesn't follow it, and he does wrong, he'll hurt himself, and he'll come back, and he'll do it the right way next time. Which is exactly how it works. But nevertheless, it's better than that than the constant contentions. The constant contention. We could even take this out of context of a wife-husband relationship here, an employee-employer relationship. Make your suggestions, but if your boss says, no, this is the way we're going to do it, then let him fall on his nose. He'll learn, and then he'll pick himself back up. If he's a good boss, he'll dust himself off and go, okay, let's try it your way now. He'll learn, and that's great. That's fine, and we need to not only listen to those who are under us. I have nobody at work under me. I'm at the bottom of the totem pole. But we need to listen to those that are under us, okay? But also we need to allow those that are over us to go ahead and do what they think is right to do. And if it's wrong and they get hurt, then that's all right. We'll just pick ourselves up and we'll go. But that contention never goes anywhere. Verse 14, house and riches are the inheritance of fathers, and a prudent wife is from the Lord. So now we have houses and riches come from fathers. In other words, you inherit from your parents. Your parents don't inherit from you. And but at the same time, even though houses and riches can come from a father, the only place you get a prudent wife is from the Lord. You can get a wife from anywhere, but a prudent wife comes from the Lord. And that's why it's so important that that when it comes down time to marriage, or we counsel people who are thinking about marriage, they need to get the Lord involved. People always have these, well, let's see if you're compatible. Let's just see if the Lord wants you to do it. First thing to do is just find out if the Lord wants you to do it. If the Lord don't want you to do it, it doesn't matter how compatible you are. Because what you want is the Lord to give you a prudent wife. And if you are a female in here, potentially being a wife one day, then you need to learn to be prudent. You need to learn to be prudent. Verse 15, slothfulness casteth into a deep sleep, and an idle soul shall suffer hunger. So active, we need to be active. I think it was you, Lex, that said we're not meant to be sedentary. We're meant to move. Okay? We're meant to move. And so likewise, not only in physicalness, but even in our productivity, we are meant to move. I was thinking this week, and I thought it was clever, and then it was so clever in my brain, and then I said it to my wife. She says, I don't get it. I thought, oh, well, it sounded clever in my brain, but when I thought of it, I thought it'd be a great saying. One of those posters they used to have with, and then they have those little sayings underneath them. You could hang up those. I thought, man, this would make a great poster. I thought it was so great. And then I said it to Susan, and she's like, I don't get it. I'm like, rats. And it sounded so inspirational. But I was thinking about obstacles, right? Obstacles, overcoming obstacles and things like that. And I'm sitting there working, and someone said, oh, this is going to be it's always such an obstacle. And I was thinking, and it crossed my mind, well, gravity's an obstacle. But think where you'd be if you didn't fight back against it. Is that not clever? See, I thought so too in my head. I thought it was great. I thought, what a slogan. And but it is so it means we were basically, think about it. Since we're meant to walk, it means we were meant to push back against the obstacles. We were born to overcome obstacles. And therefore obstacles aren't there to go, oh, I can't do it. No, obstacles are, okay, I'm a creature who was born to overcome obstacles. And therefore, because if you didn't, where would you be? You never stand up. You never take your first step. But you instinctively do, because you were born to overcome obstacles. But slothfulness casts us into a deep sleep, and an idle soul shall suffer hunger. Notice where the idleness really ends up being, in the very soul. You're not physically idle. You end up being physically idle. But where you really become idle is in your very soul. You lose that spark, that initiative. What do they call it in exercise? Motivation. You lose your motivation to do it. In other words, you become an idle soul. An idle soul ends up with a slothful body or slothful activity. Why? Because there's no desire in the soul to overcome. There's no desire in the soul to push and do the next thing. Okay? And I know there's motivational speakers out there and stuff, but somewhere we got to get self-motivated. Somewhere we just got to get to where we can get ourselves up out of bed in the morning and get ourselves going and find a reason within ourselves to do the next thing. I understand motivational speakers and people like to be pumped up, and I went to pep rallies when I was a kid too, and I understand those things, but I don't understand people who expect you to motivate them to do something before they feel like they have to do it. I'm like, why should I motivate you to do that? Where's your intrinsic motivation to get up and do something and better yourself and be better at your job next time and do this better? And where is this ability to, this desire to learn? I believe all education ultimately is self-taught. You know what I'm saying? The student has to want to learn. The old expression, I know it's an old expression and people have countered it, but you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. You know? And you can put the information out there in front of people, but if they don't want to learn it and they don't want to accept it, there is nothing you can do. Okay? Because ultimately, they got to want to learn it. If they don't want to learn it, then they ain't going to learn it.
I've been teaching people for almost 20 years. They don't want to learn, they're not going to learn.
Nope, they're not. They're not. When I was running the school, I put in things. People didn't like them, but I put them in because ultimately I said this: the people who are going to cause us the most trouble, people that don't want to learn. They're not intrinsically motivated to learn. They have no desire to learn. They're here. It's like a finishing school to them. It's a party. It's a club, but they don't want to learn. I said so I put in academic protocols, and even if you paid your bill, even if you didn't get demerits per se, you didn't have any kind of antisocial behavior, but if your grades started dropping or if you didn't bother, you're out. You're discouraged. You're a pull on my teachers. You're a pull on the students around you. You're a pull on the entire system. Go home. Go find something you want to do. That's exactly right. I remember I did. I made many people upset because I'd send people home. And they go, but their bill's paid. So what? But they're not antisocial. I understand that. But they're failing all their classes. What are they here for? What is this point? What are the point is? Well, don't do that. You'll wreck them socially. Good. Let them go. Let them go find something they want to do. Absolutely. And I would kick them out the door. Oh, I got people a lot upset with me. Oh, man, that's the number one thing got people upset with me, when I would academically withdraw them from school and tell them, go. Now, and I think I wasn't unkind to them. I'm like, look, you obviously don't want to learn this stuff. You obviously don't want to be in ministry. Okay? So go find something that excites you. Go find something that you want to do. You don't have to be in ministry to be an asset to the kingdom of God. Go find something you're good at and do it and glorify God with the talent that you have. You don't need to be here. And when it came to bringing students in, I would always, no, if you're only here to socialize, this is not the place to be. We're here to train people to be in the ministry. This is not a finishing school for your failed Christian education. Ooh, that just got me in trouble. But that's all right. I'm out here on my own, just usins. So who cares? What can anybody actually do to me? But because at the end of the day, that's where a lot of places are. They started these Christian schools. I don't have anything against Christian education and Christian schools. I don't have a problem. If it's done right, I don't have any problem with it. Okay? And if it's only there as a discipleship tool, then your church has got problems. Okay? Because this should be a place to educate, and church should disciple. Okay? And so turning it into, our churches failed to disciple them. Parents are failing to disciple them. And so let's put them in this reformatory school, and to where we can, I'm sorry, did I say that? Yes, I did. And to disciple them. And then all of a sudden they get down to the end of it and we're still not disciple them. So let's go create a college that we can send them to, because we haven't quite discipled them yet. And I said, no. It's not the point of this school. It's not what we're going to do. You're going to come here. You're going to, and one guy says, but they need that extra. I said, look, dude, you've had them for 20 plus years and you still ain't got them there. What do you think I'm going to do them for? It's like, no, that's not the point of this school. Okay. That's not what we're doing because I know you learn because you want to learn. That's it. And so when the academics start tanking, I know what it means. You don't really want to be here. You may pay your bills and you may not give us any problems morally or, or socially, but you don't want to be here. I told a guy one day, I looked at him and his father's a big time pastor with a big church and everything. I looked right across the table at him and I said, you don't want to be here. I said, don't lie to me. I said, you don't want to be here. He goes, why do you say that? I said, because I got your grades. You're not stupid. You just don't want to be here. You're here because your daddy sent you here. Because he gives your daddy marks, to have his son at this school. So the problem is, that's not what this school is about. So either you pull yourself up out of your own bootstraps and you start passing your classes, or I'm gonna withdraw you from school. You can't do that. Watch me. I did too. I withdrew him from school. Was his dad happy with me? Nope. Do I care? Nope. Nope, not at all. Why? Because that was not the point of the school. Because people learn because they want to learn or they don't want to learn. And there's no sense in them being a parasite on the rest of the academic body. Now, I take no responsibility for what's going on now because I'm not there. Okay? But I can just tell you when I was there, I made a lot of people upset because I thoroughly believe in this, that there's an idle soul involved in this. One young man challenged me on this issue. He passed his classes, so I never withdrew him. And he said, it doesn't matter how much brain power we put into this thing. It doesn't matter. That's what he told me. It doesn't matter. He passed. He went out into the ministry. We moved here. We started this church. You guys came, thankfully. He gave me a call. Lovelady, can you reteach me everything you tried to teach me when I was in seminary with you? I'm like, I beg your pardon? He goes, this really is a brain game out here, isn't it? I said, that's what I told you. He goes, but I really thought, I said, I told you. Your whole vocation is about a book. It's not about how good you can swing a hammer. Not about how good you can push a lawnmower. Not about good how skilled you are with a commode plunger. I said, it ultimately comes down to a book. And if it's a book, then it's an academic process. And you need to learn to study. And you fought me on it for 4 years. You passed your classes. Oh, his academic, he'd be failing. I bring him in for that meeting. I'm going to withdraw you. He'd pass. He wasn't stupid. He was just lazy. He didn't think it was important. Then all of a sudden, he's begging to be taught how to study because he didn't bother. Now, I taught him. I showed him everything. He was sitting in class with people who learned it. Because you're self-taught, aren't you? At the end of the day. So I had to go through it all over. I did, because there's no sense in people suffering. And so I did. But that idle soul, he's not idle anymore. He figured it out, told him. I had another guy call me after he got working for a church. He goes, you were right. It's everything you said it was. It's like, yes, of course it is. Told you. What do you think? I was lying to you? I said, of course it was. That's exactly what I told you was. And anyway, so we move on. Verse 16, he that keepeth the commandment keepeth his own soul, but he that despiseth his ways shall die. So keeping the commandment keeps your own soul. In other words, following the Lord, learning from the Lord, yielding to the Lord. But if you despise his ways, you die. So we have to understand this, that this is not just a matter of a preference. This is life or death. Verse 17, he that hath pity upon the poor lendeth unto the Lord, and that which he hath given will he pay him again. So I'm talking about the poor paying him back again. It's talking about the Lord paying him back again. And so giving to the poor, okay, and then by the way, before we get off on this humanitarian kicking cause, there's plenty of teaching in Scripture about giving to the poor, okay? And it's not what people make it out to be. We've had people walk in here on a Sunday morning wanting $20. I offer them Jesus. I don't want Jesus. I want $20. Okay. What are you going to do with your $20? Well, I've got to get a car out of the shop. You ain't getting a car out of the shop with $20. Okay, if you got a car sitting in a mechanic shop someplace, it's going to cost you more than $20. I don't know of a mechanic that'll just charge you $20. No, you're doing something else with it. But the point is, did I give him $20? No, I did not. I tried to give him Jesus and he didn't want it. And people use things like the feeding of the 5,000. But they forget that the 5,000 were following Christ long before they knew they were going to get fed. When they talk about the feeding of the 4,000, again, all following Christ before they knew they were going to get fed. And so there has to come a point in here where we understand that I think we have overdone the humanitarianism side of things, okay, to where people look at church as an ATM. Susan used to work as a secretary of a church, and she'd have to deal with people who came in because we had a food pantry and a clothes closet and things like that. And people would come in and she'd have to get them set down in order to get the benevolence pastor over there to have to deal with them. And they'd sit in there sharing addresses and numbers of organizations. And one lady had it all down. She never had to work. She's perfectly healthy because this church would pay the electric bill, that church would pay the water bill, this church would give her groceries, and she knew how often you could go to these various locations to get what you needed, and she had them all on a rotation. Perfectly healthy woman. And she was sharing all this information with everybody else sitting in the room. Now, that's what I call a scam. Okay? That's what I call a scam. Could you get her to come to church? Nope. She was telling me a story the other day about a guy came in and called everybody a hippie. Y'all a bunch of hypocrites. Now I need some food. Let me tell you something. No, but he that pitieth the poor, someone who's genuinely poor, genuinely needs the help, lendeth unto the Lord, and it's the Lord that pays you back. It's the Lord that makes sure you're taken care of when you lend unto the Lord. By the way, he's not talking about taking money out of the mouth of your children in order to take care of the poor. Okay? He's not talking about making your creditors go without being paid in order to lend unto the poor. Okay? If you check out, especially the Old Testament where this stuff is really implemented well, you'll find you got to take care of everything. You got to take care of the Lord. You got to take care of your creditors. You got to take care of your family. And then you have stuff left over. And that's where God really looks at and says, now let's see what you're going to do with it. And then you find someone who genuinely is poor and genuinely needs help, and you take care of them. God says, now I'll pay you back. Because you took care of me, you took care of your family, you took care of your creditors, and then you had stuff left over, and you used it wisely. Well done. And then I will. Because again, if you look at God's welfare system in the Old Testament, what was it? Okay, you guys who own all these big fields, when you're going through reaping these fields, don't reap the corners. If something falls out of the basket, leave it there. Then he told the poor, now, you don't own the field. Now you go into that field and you reap the corners and you pick up the stuff that's fallen on the ground. Now what he said? God says, I'll take care of the poor. The poor you'll always have with you, and I've got ways of taking care of them. But what did he tell the poor to do? Get up and go out and go to work. Go into the fields, reap the corners, pick up the stuff that fell out of the baskets. You know, it wasn't, well, go to this church, go to that church, go to this church, go to that church. I'm not against helping people. I love the idea that we have a Joy Junction and we have different places like that in town that we can contribute to and take care of the poor. I think it's a brilliant idea. But at the same time, there's professional poor people, which really aren't poor. Like those people who panhandle on the corners of the street, you probably actually bring in a bigger income per day than we do. And, and people who are genuinely just going through a bad time and genuinely just need a leg up. I'm going to give a shout out, I hope you don't mind, to my sister-in-law. My sister-in-law went through a really hard time for a period of time. She had 3 kids and no job, and it was just rough. So she went down and she applied for welfare. And for a couple of months or whatever it was, she had to draw just to make a living, just to eat. While she was doing that, she's getting herself an education. And when she got out, she graduated and she got her education. Okay? And she's still doing the job she got her education to do. And as she started working, you know what she did? She walked back down to the local welfare office and she paid everything back. Paid everything. I'm not saying you have to do that, but I'm just saying, because to her mind, you're helping me through a hard time, and now I'm going to pay it back so you can help somebody else through a hard time. And so it's like, look, there are people who are generally going through a hard time, and the Lord took care of her, fed her babies, kept a roof over her head. She got a great career, and all her kids are grown and having babies of their own. and she did well. She did well. But in her mind, I'm having a hard time. This is not going to be a career, being on welfare. This is something. And by the way, that's exactly what it's designed for, to help people going through a hard time. I'm not saying much about his politics one way or the other, but I did like our President Bill Clinton, his philosophy. It's a hand up, not a handout. Do you remember him saying that? It's a hand up, not a handout. Okay? In other words, this is designed to help you when you fall on hard times. But get yourself back up. Get yourself back into society, and let's do this, And I was surprised when I got here and I went down to one of these local Goodwills. There's one up there, I think it's on Paseo. And it's got an entire career training center in it. And it has this little shop that you think of as Goodwill, but then it's got all this back room for people going there to learn how to do skills to get back into society. I think it's brilliant. That's exactly what people need. People need to learn how to be productive members of society. But if you lend unto the Lord, if you have pity upon the poor, you lend unto the Lord. Verse 18, chasten thy son while there is hope, and let not thy soul spare for his crying. So chastening a son, by the way, the Lord chastens us as his children. Chasten thy son while there is hope, while there's a chance. Don't wait till it's too late. Don't wait till they're sitting behind bars to get tough. Stand firm when there's hope, when they're young and they're pliable. Okay, give them discipline then. Oh, but they're just so cute. They're not a puppy. Okay, this is a human being that's going to be an adult you're going to have to live with in society, and everybody else is going to have to live with in society. Teach them to be responsible. Teach them to be polite. Teach them restraint and teach them discretion. Teach them to value not only themselves but others around them. That way, when they grow up and they become an adult, guess what they realize? They realize I'm a part of a bigger society. Okay? People don't have to agree with me. People don't even have to like me. But we all have to function together. Okay? Instead of these babies that go out and get upset and suck their thumb and end up getting themselves thrown into, like one guy said, you either are going to restrain your children or the government will restrain your children. Either give your children the discipline now they need to become responsible adults, or ultimately society will have to cage them because you failed to do your job. So chasten thy son where there is hope. Okay? And let not thy soul spare for his crying. This is not crying like, oh, he's hurt. It's not talking about that. It's like I'd say it's like a dog yelping when it's not hurt. You know what I'm saying? If you don't pay attention to Ollie and you accidentally bump into him, he yelps. He ain't hurt. It's to get your attention. It's the way they do it. It sounds like he's hurt. Like when he's hurt, he yelps too. They only have one. They have yelp. And so they yelp. And so here's a kid crying. Why is he crying? You crying. I'll give you a reason to cry. No, but they cry and they whine because you're not letting them do what they want to do. Oh, why can't I do this? So-and-so down the road does it. Their dad lets them do it. Their mom lets them do it. Why can't I do that? Why can't I do that? They're crying. Don't, God says here, let not thy soul spare for his crying. In other words, don't back up. Because you've got a goal and you know where you're going. And maybe it inconveniences them today. But ultimately in the end, it's going to be better for them. So don't spare your discipline for their crying. Don't you love me? Yes, and that's why you're not going to get to do that. Yes, and that's why I'm not getting that for you. But no, everybody doesn't. Yes, they do. No, because you don't. Therefore, everybody doesn't. You can always tell in dealing with anybody when they've really lost the moral high ground, when they start using these broad terms like everybody, nobody. It's like, okay, you don't know everybody, and so therefore it's not possible for you to be able to give me that statistic. I just love it. Anyway, spare not. And suddenly I'm not popular with the children. Here we go. Verse 19. But I shall spare not for the crying, because it's true. A man of great wrath shall suffer punishment. For if thou deliver him, yet thou must do it again. A man of great wrath. What does that mean? Here's someone with a bit of a temper, okay, whose solution to every issue is to get angry and to strike out. Because wrath, or wrath, as the British would say, wrath, to strike out. If you deliver his soul, because again, what happens? He's a man of great wrath. He's going to end up suffering punishment. And if you deliver him once, you're going to have to deliver him again. Why? Because that temper is always going to get him into trouble. That temper is always going to get her into trouble. That temper. You ever heard that? I heard that all the time. Temper. I think it was, I remember one time when I was growing up, here goes my dad illustration again. Well, my dad, when he came back from Vietnam, of course, when they in the military, they teach him all kinds of, hand-to-hand combat, stuff like that, And so my dad, I was probably about 7, 8 years old. He decided he was going to teach me some hand-to-hand combat. Okay. And so my cousin Fred, who's only about 4 months younger than me, we're both gathered together there, and he said, I'm going to teach you some stuff, And so he showed us this little move. So I'm going to act like I'm going to punch you, and then he taught this little maneuver, where you end up flipping him over on the ground, and mobilizing him for a moment. And so we were practicing. I suppose it worked, but really, if you didn't do it every day, I don't know how you take on somebody that's like 4 times your size, but we were just little kids, saying. And then all of a sudden, he just stopped teaching us. He stopped teaching us. No more teaching hand-to-hand combat. I thought I was going to be the next Bruce Lee, but no hand-to-hand combat. I'm like, well, why did you stop? And he said, because you have too much of a temper. And my fear is, if I teach you to protect yourself, that temper is going to kick in and you're going to hurt someone. And I have to honestly say, from that point on, Dad did more training on temper management and anger management than he did on anything else, because he saw in me the potential to get into a lot of trouble because I could flare up, get angry at injustices that I perceived. But he taught me over time to try to remain calm, to think it through. So can I physically defend myself? No. But you know what that taught me to do? That taught me to think my way out of situations. That taught me to think my way into situations, because I didn't have any means of defense. But it was a smart thing to do, and I'm glad he did it. I make a living with that now, and I'm glad he did it. I enjoy those martial arts. I still like watching people punch on each other. I completely enjoy that kind of stuff. But at the same time, I'm kind of glad I never really learned to do it until I've at least learned to control my temper. Because I believe my dad was 100% right. I mean, he stopped. He wouldn't even teach my cousin. But my cousin didn't have the temper I had, but I have a temper. I don't even think it's safe to say I had. I think I have a temper, but when it flares, my dad taught me discipline to be able to reason myself down out of doing things that I would eventually regret. And to reason and to think my way out of things. So and to anticipate the potential of getting into them so that you can find a way around them. And so, very important disciplines. But a man of great wrath shall suffer punishment. For if thou deliver him, yet thou must do it again. And I think, honestly, if I do watch politics or anything like that, all I see are a bunch of people with a bunch of wrath. I've read of the great compromisers. But that's a bad word nowadays, isn't it? The great compromisers of our early days. Whether it be, because there's always been opposing factions, as Lex well pointed out this morning. It's nothing new in history. There's always been opposing factions. But at times we've had these people who are able to get these two sides to sit down and reason and talk. And those men were the ones called the great compromisers. Because they realize we live in a pluralistic society and everybody's got their own opinion, but somehow we have to learn to get along. I read an interesting statistic yesterday. No, that was Saturday. It's Friday. I read an interesting statistic on Friday. And someone was doing a survey of evangelicals. Okay? Because evangelicals are typically in politics and society referred to as very conservatives. Those are the conservatives. Okay? Really? They typically, everybody thinks they vote Republican. They stand very conservative on those things. And so it's becoming almost synonymous. So there's whole organizations now that, first of all, define evangelical. That was an important thing because you can't hardly survey and keep stats if you don't know what you're looking at. Okay? And so they define evangelical with 4 points. Okay? You're an evangelical. It doesn't matter. I mean, you may have a different name on your sign, but to be an evangelical, there's 4 points. 1, the Bible is your final authority. 2, the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ is the only way to heaven. 3, you must personally believe on the Lord Jesus Christ in order to be given the gift of eternal life. 4, you want to share that news with unbelievers and encourage them to trust Jesus Christ. Those are the 4 points. Now, you can have all kinds of names on the sign, but to be an evangelical, because that's not a denomination, that's a movement. To be a part of the evangelical movement, you have those 4 things, right? Then they went into the politics of the people that fit that description. Because that's what they were looking at. And really, they found that about 60% were what would be considered politically conservative. 30% will what would be politically liberal. And there's 10% about in the middle that's kind of moderate. Okay? Then they went back and they said, oh, okay, well, surely in other words, the conservatives, the moderates, the liberals all hold to those 4 points. Consistently, without question, hold to those 4 points. Politically, they're all over the spectrum. And they went and looked at the spiritual life. Okay, let's look at the spiritual life of these 3 different groups that hold to these 4 principles. Spiritual life was exactly the same. All of them went to church. All of them read their Bibles. All of them prayed. And usually to the same intensity. But when it came to politics, they're all over the board. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, we're divided politically. And we have extremes in politics. What we're missing, what was the smallest group? The guy that sees both sides. That's the smallest group, and it's shrinking. But liberals, they're evangelicals that believe in abortion, have no problem with abortion. Not at all. By those 4 points, they're evangelicals. They have no problem with abortion. They have no problem with a lot of things. But they hold to those 4 principles. They read their Bibles and study their Bibles. They attend church regularly. They pray. They have the same type of a spiritual life as the ones over here on the very conservative side. But the shrinking group are the ones in the middle. Now think about our politics. Where are the moderates? It's almost, you're almost worse to be a moderate than you are to be a liberal or a conservative. Because compromise has just simply become a dirty word. The ability to see both sides. And what we have are people full of wrath. Jumping down each other's throat, calling each other antichrist and everything. And not, it's not a matter of a political opinion, it's a matter of a moral right and wrong, no matter what you do. And they're jumping down each other's throat, and they don't even govern from the sense of politics. They rule in the sense of from a philosophical platform. And herein lies, but it's, as Lex pointed out, it's not an unusual thing in history. What's happening is we're just entering a time when there's just less and less people in the middle. Think about it. Look at the political spectrum and how the people vote. Where are the swing voters? They're pretty much not there anymore, are they? Everybody's already got sides. All you have to do is motivate your people to get out to the polls. Because there are no swing voters anymore, because everything's too... We've lost it's become a dirty word. But somewhere in here, if we don't get down to the point where we can hold our convictions, but live in a polite society, and respect the fact that people don't always hold to our opinions, and they'll have to answer for that, but to be polite. And I love the fact that even when Portia feels like she's been shorted, she's polite. I saw her at that, and they did that one group of girls, and they handed out the trophies, and they hadn't done her group of girls. Portia's up, man. She's over there. She's talking to them folks. And you can tell what she's talking about because she's looking back. She's pointing at them. We haven't got to do anything. And I said, oh, look at there. And Tara leaned over and says, yes, we've always taught her to stand up for herself, but to be polite. And there she was. And then she got to do her thing. And she got out there and doing her hi-ya. But that's what's missing. The ability to walk up and say, I believe you skipped something, sir. Without going, how dare you, But to understand that, yes, sometimes people make mistakes. Sometimes you get shorted. And there's nothing wrong with expressing the fact that something's gone wrong. But why do you got to be rude? Why can't you be polite? Why can't you be kind? Express your opinions and respect the fact that not everybody holds your opinions. But understand, I'm saying that doesn't mean you have to compromise. That you're somehow a liberal now that because you're nice. That's almost what it is. So there's something wrong with you because you're nice. Why? Why can't we just be polite? It is okay to make mistakes. No. And do you know the best environment to live in is an environment where you feel comfortable making a mistake? It's not going to be the end of the world. You'll pick yourself up, dust yourself off. Everybody around you will give you that liberty to make that mistake, and you'll grow and you will become so much better because you're not. And when you live in an environment where you feel it's okay to make a mistake, you'll take bigger risks and you'll do more things because you're not afraid of failing. Because if I fail, it's okay. I'll just get up, I'll learn from my failure, and I'll keep on going. So, let's close it there this morning. Let's pray, and then we'll